episode 63 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You can find all of the archives at hankgarner.com. And if you would, click on the link for iTunes and go rate the show and leave a comment if you don't mind. It really does help. Also, there's a link on the right-hand sidebar for Amazon. And if you click on that link and then shop at Amazon the way you normally would, we get a small commission, which helps us buy new audio equipment to keep the show sounding great and helps us to bring you more content on a regular basis. If you do that, send me an email and tell me what you bought. Someone this past week bought a new laptop and then let me know, and we do appreciate those things. It really does help. Today, author David Bruns stops by the show to tell me about his new book, The Sealbearer. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm very happy to have my friend David Bruns on the show with me. David's got a new book coming out this week, and we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to follow up on this project that David and his writing partner J.R. Olson were on the show a couple of months ago talking with me about. So welcome to the show, David.
Thanks for having me back, Hank.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so glad that we could work this out. We've been chatting for a couple of weeks or maybe more about trying to get you slotted into the show, and so happy that we could both get our schedules to sync up so we could do this. You've got a new book coming out this week, don't you?
It is a new apocalypse weird novel called The Sealbearer, and it'll release in the middle of this week. So I like to call it Planes, Trains, and Automobiles meets the apocalypse. It's basically an apocalyptic road trip through Southeast Asia. So it's very exciting. It's fun. It's fast. I'm not really a gore guy, so there's not a lot of gore, but definitely you hit all the apocalyptic tropes all along the way.
Nice. We're going to come back and talk about the new book in a minute. Mm-hmm. But, if you come on the show, I've got to ask you the question that I ask everyone when I start. What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer?
So my first memory of wanting to be a writer was, I kind of always knew. So even when I was, 6 and I had learned to read and I had, finished my first Hardy Boys and I was so proud of myself. I used to have my grandfather worked for Bell Telephone, what's now one of the AT&Ts. And he gave me a little vinyl zippered briefcase that I would carry around. I keep my stories in there, and I would write a story or a poem. I'd show it to my teacher. I'd stuff it into my little briefcase. I was a total geek. But I loved writing stories at that age and did up through sort of middle grade school. And then, it sort of reverted to more like high school writing assignments and things, but I was always a huge reader, and I always knew that I'd come back to writing. So it took me 40 years, but I did come back to it.
That is such a common theme with interviews that I've done, is that as a youngster you've got this love and this desire to make stories of your own, and usually it comes from being fascinated and enamored with other people's stories, and then a lot of times that desire goes dormant. Maybe not the desire, but at least the will to act on the desire goes dormant for a while, and then that thing always bubbles back up. What was it for you? I know you had a military career, then you're also a recovering executive, and give us a little bit of your backstory as to how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so I actually went to the U.S. Naval Academy. So it was a military school, and graduated, went into submarines, and I was a submarine officer for 6 years after I graduated, and then I was in the corporate world for about 20 years. I'm sort of a single task guy. I don't multitask very well, and what I found both when I was in the Navy and and when I was a corporate guy was, there just wasn't enough brain energy, enough creative energy for me to do my job, take care of my family and, be a father and be a present husband and also write. There just didn't seem to be enough mental energy for me. So the real turning point for me came in 2013. I was working for a very small tech company here in Minneapolis, and long story short, had a disagreement with the CEO. I hadn't been there very long, and realized it was his company, and the handwriting was on the wall, and left the company very suddenly. We parted on good terms and all those kinds of things, but I was pretty disappointed. I'd had big hopes for this job. And came home. Now, I traveled a lot, like almost every week kind of travel, and had for several years. So me coming home and being home all the time, all of a sudden, to say that's a strain on the family unit is sort of an understatement. So, after about 24 hours, my wife is like, you need to find something to do because you're driving us all crazy. And this is like middle of April. So I had said, I'm taking the summer off. I'm in no mental headspace to look for a job. I really didn't need to look for one immediately. And she says, you need to find something to do because you're driving us crazy, and it's only been like 3 days. So she said, you always said you're going to write a book. Why don't you do it? And I'm like, that's a good idea. I always have said that, and I always know I wanted to do it. It was a bucket list item. Yeah. And I said, you're right. I'm going to go write that book. So I sat down and I'm like, okay, how do I write a novel? I mean, I'd read hundreds and hundreds of books. I'd always been a huge reader, and sort of sat down, and I had an idea for a book, and I think I had even written the first chapter. Pulled that one out and said, okay, this is going to be it. It was called The Dream Guild. And, got like 2 chapters in and said, wow, I think I need an outline. So I wrote an outline, and then I got 2 more chapters. I'm like, man, I need to rewrite the outline. And I sort of, limped my way through this book over the course of about 3 months. And then at the end of that 3 months, I said, what do I do with this thing? I polished it up. I showed it to a few people. They're like, this is pretty good. You should do something with this. I'm like, okay. Looked at querying and traditional publishing and said, this is very broken. And, I'm not going to spend 3 months writing a book and then 3 years querying. Plus it's a first novel, and, it's got all the first novel good things and challenging things about it. So I ended up self-publishing it, and at the end of the summer, I said, in college tuition, my kids are a little bit older now, and this series called The Dream Guild Chronicles, which was really a background story, and it was a science fiction fantasy series, and finished that in about 9 to 12 months. And then I moved on to Weapons of Mass Deception with my writing partner, JR. We just happened to get connected on that project and went in a slightly different... And then we went off and worked on Weapons of Mass Deception. Yeah, so it just went really quiet.
So you wrote this first book, and you said you had a first chapter for this. How long had you been kind of stewing on this idea?
Oh, geez, probably 3 or 4 years. There was a period of time where we had lived in Singapore as a family for a year, and then I was there for 6 months, basically by myself. And I started writing again during that time, just because I did have a lot of time on my hands, and I had written a couple short stories, and toyed with the idea of writing a novel, and I think I had a first chapter and maybe half of a second chapter from that period, and that was like 2008-ish, 2009. So and then this was fast forward to 2013, so 3-4 years earlier.
Okay. I want to back up for just a second. You said that you are not a person who multitasks very easily, but you spent quite a bit of time on a nuclear-powered submarine, didn't you?
Yeah.
I have never been on a nuclear-powered submarine, but in my civilian mind, would think that there's a lot of downtime on those types of vessels. Is that true?
Yes and no. I mean, when you close the hatch on a submarine and go to sea, you sort of, really changed the rules of the world. I mean, basically, you're working on an 18-hour day because watch sections are set up into 6-hour watch sections, and you basically run a 3 watch section rotation. So your 24-hour day becomes an 18-hour day. And it doesn't matter because you never see the sun anyway, right?
Right.
So I mean, but it messes a little bit with your body clock. So basically, especially early on in your submarine career, you're very busy because you need to qualify on all the watch stations. So for at least your first year, you are either studying, standing watch, or maybe eating or sleeping. So you tend to be your time tends to be extremely busy. So after you qualify in your first watch station, which is in the engineering spaces, and that can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months, maybe a year, depending on the speed of the person as they get qualified. You move to forward watch stations, officer of the deck, and more tactical watch stations. And then you typically go and take your engineering qualification. All officers on a nuclear-powered submarine, and I was an officer, are nuclear qualified, except for the supply officers. So you typically have 12 officers and maybe 110, 120 enlisted personnel, and all of your officers, except for one, are all nuclear qualified. So in order for you to take a second tour on a submarine, you would need to go back to a second school called engineer school, and you have to take an engineering qualifying exam in order to go there. So you have to go back to nuclear reactors back in Washington, D.C. It's like a 3-day test. You have oral exams, you have written exams, you have another interview with the admiral. It's a serious test.
Yeah.
So I did take my engineering quals. You don't have to, especially if you're going to get out. I wasn't sure whether I was going to get out or not, so I ended up taking the engineer's exam. You basically get put on shore for about 6 to 8 weeks to restudy all of the engineering principles, and then you go to Washington, D.C. and take the test, and hopefully you pass. And if you pass, you're a qualified nuclear engineer, naval nuclear engineer, which I am. And if you don't pass, you can either go back and retake the test, or you can, go do something else in the Navy.
Gotcha. So there's not a lot of downtime to write a novel on a nuclear submarine.
Not real. No, no. Actually, there isn't. Plus, there isn't really a lot of space.
Right.
So even officers. I mean, I had our stateroom for 3 guys was about the size of a good size closet, not a walk-in closet, like a straight-in closet, and it had 2 fold-down desks, 2 lockers, or 2 desks, 3 lockers, which would be about the size of a high school locker, maybe a little bit bigger, and then 3 bunks along the back wall. And that was your space. And writing on board a submarine, I think, would be pretty difficult. Again, I don't multitask well. So when I'm sort of immersed in something like my engineering quals, that's basically all I think about until it's done. And then you try to do the same thing as a parent and as a husband when you're with your family. But I find it very hard to, let's say, go to work all day, give 100%, and then come home and sort of switch gears. I have a lot of respect for people who can write a novel while they're working a full-time day job, because I was never able to even really do it.
Oh, it's very difficult, and there are lots of people that juggle that, but it is it's not. I don't think that people appreciate the sacrifice that your family makes to allow a novelist to do what they do, and sadly, some people don't survive it. But that's I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah,
that those are very heavy, weighty things to have occupying your brain space at the same time. So that first book that you wrote, how was it received? Did you decided to self-publish, and you got it out there? Did it meet your expectations? Did you Did you begin to find an audience with it?
So I did begin to find an audience. I made the critical mistake that you're not supposed to do, which is, you don't do anything about platform, website, social media accounts till after you've written the book, which that's not the way to do it. So, I released the book in middle of July or something, and or end of July, and got a little burst of sales from mostly friends and family. I mean, I told everybody that I knew about it, but I didn't even have a website at that point. So even telling anyone beyond people who were, business contacts from work was really difficult because there was just no way to contact them. I didn't have a mailing list, didn't have a website, didn't have anything. Didn't even have a Twitter account, actually. So, sort of understanding all that marketing infrastructure, which is a little bit embarrassing because when I was in high tech, I did a lot of sales and marketing. So I was extremely naive. I came to writing thinking it was going to be very different from business.
Okay.
And it turns out it's not. It's a startup business. One of the companies I worked for was a Silicon Valley startup in the solar space, and it was exactly like that, actually, except that instead of having a production department and a marketing department and a guy who's raising money, it was all me. Once I sort of reorganized my head that yes, it is a creative endeavor. The writing process is a creative endeavor, but that's less than half of actually producing a book. The marketing of the book takes just as much time. It's a different skill set, mind you, but it takes just as much time and just as much effort as actually writing it. Which I don't know why I didn't really understand that going in, but it was sort of a shock to me that came in the fall of that year after I had the book out and I was starting to write the next series and thinking, okay, I should really get a website together. I really need to get a mailing list started. I really need to start to build a marketing infrastructure to support the writing. So to answer your first questions, I didn't even know enough to have expectations, really. So, I came at it as a total newbie thinking it was going to be this big, different thing. And what I found out after sort of futzing around for a couple of months was it really wasn't any different than any other business. It's a case of building a brand and building a platform and putting out good products and building an audience along the way.
I think that we have been so programmed by the lie that what writers do is you write a book, you hand it to a publisher, and then you go to your cabin in the woods and you goof off for 6 months until you're inspired again and you write another book and you hand it in. And that's not even true for traditionally published authors, much less indies. So I don't think that your story is very different from a lot of folks. There really are grave misconceptions about publishing that people just don't understand that every author, not only as an author, but you're a marketer and most of us are publishers, and there's a lot to it that people just don't take into account.
Yeah, and people will say things like, well, do you ever get writer's block? And the answer is, well, no. I mean, this is my job. Right. When you're going to work in a factory or at a car repair shop or in an office, do you get job block? No, you get your ass out of bed and you go to work. Right. And granted, maybe what I write that day gets thrown out in the editing process. That's entirely possible. But I don't say, well, I just don't feel like being moved today. That's just not how it works. This is what I do.
Right. One of my favorite quotes by Jim Butcher. Someone asked him what he does when he gets writer's block, and what if the muse doesn't show up? And he said, I don't have a muse, I have a mortgage.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, this is what I do. So, yeah, you show up, and that's really half the. I mean, it's more than half the battle, actually. Just showing up, and even on the first book, I sort of knew that intuitively, and I think my goal was 5 pages a day. And I noticed immediately that sometimes I'd whip out 5 pages in 2 hours, and other times, like 6 hours later, I'm laboring along. But I was even before I even knew anything about writing a novel, I was like, okay, no, I need to set a goal so I know when I'm going to finish, and I have something to work with, because you can't edit a blank page. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, Weston Oak said he sets a goal of 5 pages a day every day, and he's one of the most prolific authors I know. And it's you don't have to have these ridiculous goals. It's putting your butt in the chair every day turns out work. It's just the way it works. But you obviously had figured out some of these marketing and business problems when you and JR started working on Weapons of Mass Deception, because that was I know we've talked about it on the show before, but that was a very successful project that you guys met and exceeded your crowdfunding goal.
Yeah.
And I'm sliding my chair back as I grab this book off the shelf, this gorgeous hardcover book that you guys so kindly sent to me and autographed, and it's a beautiful book, and better than that, it is a fantastic read. You want to give us the Cliff Notes version of what happened with that project?
Yeah, sure. So JR and I got together in the spring of 2014. So I had just finished the first draft of the third book in my science fiction trilogy, and I knew I wanted to branch into a different genre. And we met. We were friends, but we sort of got this idea together through happenstance. But got paired up on this idea. JR, it turns out, it had this idea for a novel, which is basically the premise of it is that Saddam Hussein really did have a cache of nuclear weapons, and they were smuggled into Iran just before the start of the Second Gulf War. And they're held by a hardline Iranian faction. And so there's all kinds of intrigue about splits within the Iranian government, and then there's some U.S. characters who come in and meet these people along the way, and one of them ends up on U.S. soil towards the end of the book. So I came into this, and I had finished writing the third book in the science fiction trilogy. So I had learned a lot of lessons about marketing at that point. I had a website, I had a blog, I had a mailing list, I had social media accounts, I had a core of readers, and decided when we did this that we were going to do it right, air quotes right. So we were going to blog about the process. We're going to talk about how we got the idea, how we worked the idea, how we decided what we were going to publish. So JR initially came in and wanted to traditionally publish. I said, well, we should probably talk about that. I mean, I'm not saying no, because it's, this is a partnership, right? We should talk about that because as you were talking about, everybody sort of has this thing, well, I'll just write a great book and they'll recognize its greatness and I'll just go off and write another book. That's not really how it works. So we blogged about this process along the way. It was very much a sort of feeling our way along because, the writing collaboration process, we weren't even sure going in if it was going to work. And I very distinctly recall I wrote a couple test chapters and we were trying to figure out, does he write, one chapter and I write another chapter, or does he write the good guys and I write the bad guys? We ended up, he did most of the research and the plotting, and I was the writing muscle, and then we edited it together. But I very distinctly recall early on giving him a test chapter 2 and him sending it back and saying, man, this is not going to work. And I'm thinking, but we're good friends. We sort of work through all these things, and we sort of have everything's 50-50. It's 50-50 cost. It's 50-50 profits. It's 50-50 on divvying up the work and on the marketing. And we have veto power. So, I mean, if somebody really doesn't want to do something or really feels strongly against it, we don't do it. If somebody, and generally one of us will say, yeah, whatever, I don't really care all that much. But going through that process of writing and then revising and then getting beta readers, and then we got to the spring of or early 2015, and JR really wanted to do a hardback. And producing one version of the book is expensive enough. Producing 3 versions of the book can get a little spendy. Yeah. So we had this idea to do a Kickstarter, and did do it in March. It was very successful. We raised about $6,000. Spent it all on the rewards and working, with giving gifts to people who had helped us along the way. And really blogged about how we spent all the money, how we came up with our ideas, how we worked out the Kickstarter campaign, all the details, all the stats, and finished up. We finally sent the final copies of the hardback out in the last week of July. So we had said that we'd have them out by July. Our internal goal was the end of June. Turns out that making a hardback version is a lot different than making a paperback version. It did turn out great. There was a lot of sweat that went into that, I got to tell you. But we were really happy with it. We're actually today on a road trip for our second novel, which we're in the process of plotting now, and we were talking about whether or not we're going to do a Kickstarter for book 2 in this series. So we're kind of leaning towards it now, but it's a ton of work, I really have to say. It's not like you just throw up a page and people show up and give you money. That's just not how Kickstarter works.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the reoccurring theme is that very rarely does any part of the process involve you throwing something out there and people flocking to you.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's just not the way it works. Yes, the power has been given to the people to do things, but that does not mean that it just comes easily or naturally. There's still a lot of hard work that goes into it. I'm super excited about that second book. I didn't know you guys were going to follow that up, but that's great news.
We are, yeah. So it's we got our inspiration by reading the paper, and so Minneapolis today is the number 1 city in the U.S. for ISIS recruits.
Really?
Yes. They've had 10 confirmed. I think it's 10 confirmed young people who've been recruited by ISIS and have either left the country or tried to leave. So this is about, and we've interviewed some local people here in the Somali community, also in the FBI and in the other law enforcement community. But the book is about homegrown violent extremists. And again, it'll have strong ties to the Minneapolis area. And we'll have some of the recurring characters from book 1.
Nice. Can't wait to see that. And when you get ready, the door is always open for you to come back and talk about that.
We will do that.
I'm excited about it. Yeah, I'm excited to have you guys talk about it. But the reason we're here today is to talk about the Sealbearer. Mm-hmm. And this exciting book coming out this week from Apocalypse Weird. This will be the first book that will kick off phase 2, I guess, that or the second wave. There's been a little lull for a couple of months, and you're going to kick that back off this week. Tell me a little bit about the book and where the idea came from and where it's set. I know that Apocalypse Weird, we've got different sections of the world that are being destroyed, and just tell me about how you came to yours.
Sure. So this is Lucky 13. So
awesome.
I will be the 13th novel. I actually got the idea for it from the very first wave of novels, and I sort of read through all the novels which were coming up, some of which have happened and some of which haven't for a whole bunch of reasons, and was struck by the fact that almost none of them were outside the U.S. And I lived in Asia for 2 years. Lived in Singapore, but traveled for work all over the region, primarily Southeast Asia, but also a lot of China. And immediately said, somebody needs to write a book for Apocalypse Weird set in Asia. I mean, if you do the math, and I just found this startling. So in North America, from Nicaragua all the way up to the Arctic Circle, there's about 530 million people. There's about 7 billion people in the world. So we're missing a huge chunk of the population if you concentrate everything in the U.S. So I put in a pitch in the spring sometime and got accepted for a novel to be delivered to them in early August. Now, there was some reshuffling of the schedule and everything, but I got a call in, I guess it was early September, that they loved the book and they were going to move it up, and it was going to be the first of the second wave. So it's set in Southeast Asia. So it's a U.S. Businessman. Think like a Mark Zuckerberg kind of guy, a software billionaire, 26 years old. He's in Singapore on a business trip with a couple of business colleagues, and while he's there, the end of the end of the world goes down. Turns out that our friend, his name is Trent, when he was 16 and he was trying to fit in with a group, had gotten a tattoo on his chest. And it's actually a tattoo of a dragon, and I'm not giving anything away because this happens in the first chapter. And it's a UV tattoo, so it's normally not visible. But even on the flight in, as there's this weird electrical storm is going on, this tattoo starts to burn, and he realizes, there is something going on here. Then the next day, when everything starts to fall apart, he's figuring out that there's something. There is something definitely wrong in Mudville, and somehow he's tied to all this. And a girl shows up and says, I need you to come with me, and she helps him get off the island. But it turns into like an apocalyptic road trip from Singapore, which is on the very tip of the Malaysian Peninsula, up the Malaysian Peninsula over to Penang, which is an island off the west coast of Malaysia, into Thailand, and finally up into China to a Shangri-La-like place called Shambhala.
So as you're planning this book and you're kind of re-immersing yourself in that part of the world and that culture, was that exciting for you to get to revisit this place that you used to live and work and obviously had some fondness for?
Yeah, so I really did enjoy it, and almost every setting in the book is real, and almost every one are settings that I've been to, or I've been to something very, very similar. I mean, so some of them are not actual places, but they're based on real places. So Penang, for example, is a small island off the west coast of the Malaysian Peninsula. I've been there, I don't know, 36 times, maybe 50 times for business. Beautiful little island, separated from the mainland by about a 9-mile bridge. So if you've got pandemonium on the mainland, the officials on Penang blow the bridge, and they basically have a little drawbridge that they put up and they let down to let people on board. So it was really good to visit the old places, and also because I've read all the previous 12 books, to sort of spin off of what previous authors had done. It turns out one of the main characters, the main evil character, is General Naga, who was in. I borrowed him from Elena Georgi. He was a little, I guess, one step above a cameo character in her novel, and so I was just struck by this guy, this Southeast Asian Vietnamese guy who sort of shows up in her novel, very mysterious. And I emailed her and I said, could I use him in the book? And she says, oh yeah, he's a drug runner from the Golden Triangle, which is Thailand, Laos, Burma, opium production center in Southeast Asia. And she sort of gave me a little bit of background, and I just meant to use him as like, maybe in one chapter, and he sort of, takes on a whole new life, and he is the main bad guy, actually. So, be careful what you wish for, because I stole Elena's character, and now he's taken on. This is Naga 2.0 here.
I love when that happens, when you have these plans for a character and they say, no, I'm going to do this this thing
going in this
here.
direction.
Yeah. Now I know that Apocalypse Weird doesn't have a lot of rules. Nick and the guys have been very very liberal with their with their sandbox,
Yep.
shall we say. But there are certain points that you have to hit, because this is a large universe that is going somewhere.
Right.
So each of the pieces, while they are loose and there's a lot of freedom there, you do still have to advance the story in a certain way. What was that process for you like when you're planning out the book? And was it difficult for you to maintain your artistic freedom while working within someone else's restraints?
So the way Apocalypse Weird is set up, you're exactly right. They have, you got a territory, and they have some, 3 or 4 pretty loose rules, right?
Yeah.
You must have this kind of event, and it must sort of end up here, kind of thing. So it wasn't that difficult to work them in. I did want to try to make it unique to that part of the world. So, for example, one of the required elements is an earthquake. Well, if you have an earthquake underwater, you end up with a tsunami, which is one of the biggest fears of coastal communities within Southeast Asia. So, spoiler alert, the book has a tsunami in it. But it's so working in little organic twists like that, I thought it was going to be painful to really have to insert these things in. But what I found working in other people's universes and in a little bit of writing fan fiction is the constraints actually are kind of helpful, because you're not working with a blank canvas. You're working with sort of goalposts in here, and you can move them around the board, but you have to put them in somewhere. So it becomes kind of a game almost to fit them in a way that's clever, because again, 12 people, actually more than 12 people have done this ahead of me. And so you don't want to really repeat what they've done,
Right.
but you also want to make it organic to your story. So it becomes a little bit of a puzzle to work it in, and I kind of enjoyed it, actually. So I mean, writing this book was interesting because I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and I wrote it actually quite fast because I wanted to basically see if I could do it, actually.
Yeah.
It's because you get to the point where you sort of built this thing up, and you're like, okay, I really need to get this done. How do I do this in a way that hasn't been done before? And I find when I'm in that kind of situation, working fast and working continuously is generally the best way to go, because you keep that sort of narrative flow that for me is very important.
Do you feel like that your writing takes on a certain sense of urgency when you kind of push it forward like that?
Yeah, it's a sense of urgency, and actually, at least I find if I don't write for a couple of days for whatever reason, picking up the thread again can be tough, and
Yeah.
sort of getting that tone back. But if you write something fast and if you write it continuously, you maintain a thread through it that I think really shows up in the story at the end, and you have less editing to do, ironically, when it's written fast. I mean, you might end up going back and adding more stuff in, but I think structurally the story hangs together better. At least it does for me.
I agree with you there, and I think that that if people would take more time thinking about the book before they start writing,
Yeah.
Even if you're not a diehard outliner, and I have my opinion about that has evolved,
Yeah.
and I am an outliner. Maybe not bullet points, but definitely story beats. I need to know where the story's going,
Yeah.
and kind of points along the way. But if you spend more time up front working through where it's going, the characters, things like that, it is so much easier to let that flow and to keep that urgency and that narrative flow going. And you're right, when you get to the end, you don't have the structure problems that you do in a lot of cases. I know that you're not a big blood, guts, and gore type of guy. I'm not either. But how do you put in the kind of the sense of terror and the sense of this is the end of the world and these horrible things are happening while without going to that blood and guts end of it. What tools do you use to keep that tension and to craft a scary story without being over the top?
Yeah, so I go more for psychological tension, and actually going into it. One of the decisions I had to make early on was, how do I want to handle point of view? And I went back and looked at all 12 novels of how they had done it, whether they were all single point of view. I don't know whether there's any that were first person point of view. But
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. But I decided on a single point of view, close third person. So it's sort of, a half step removed from first person, really. I mean, it was told in third person. Trent did this, Trent did that, but it was very tightly inner monologue, and I stayed with one person because I wanted to keep that thread through, and I wanted it to all be from his perspective. So when things started happening to him, they would be, you're not jumping back and forth between heads on that. It would have been very easy, actually, because I have two other very strong characters. Would have been great to use them as points of view. But, I mean, it's only a 50,000-word novel, so they're relatively short. And jumping back and forth between points of view, I felt was starting to lose the intensity. So I stayed with one point of view all along. And he starts out as sort of a rich playboy, very self-absorbed. And at the end, he's, turned into more of a human. But there's a little twist at the end too. So I tend to do it through more psychological terror or psychological stress. I mean, this is a guy who's never fired a gun in his life, and somebody hands him a shotgun when there's zombies advancing and tells him to blow their heads off, and he's kind of freaking out about that. He doesn't even know what the recoil of a shotgun feels like, right? And this girl hands him a 12 gauge and says, "Point that way and shoot." And he just can't handle it.
Right.
So I really wanted to have a character who was sort of experiencing it all for the first time, and really, really outside of his comfort zone. Doesn't even begin to describe it. He's basically taken from a world where he's a billionaire and get whatever he wants with a phone call to a guy who's literally scrapping for his life, within a day.
How difficult was it to take this character that is maybe not likable, or at least not able for... probably a lot of people can't relate to this character, and then make him your protagonist. Was that difficult, or did you have fun with that?
So I kind of had fun with it. So I had things happen to him that, from an outsider's perspective, made him look foolish and made him and were actually kind of funny, right? But at the same time, they're actually kind of serious. So like in the very first chapter, he's in first class in Singapore Airlines, which is the premier airline in Asia, and first class is just like a whole nother level above that. And the fasten seatbelt sign comes on because they're going through this strange electrical storm. And, Trent says, "Hey, that doesn't apply to me, man. I'm going to the can." And, something happens in the bathroom, which is A, terrifying, and B, B, funny as hell. So you're sort of saying, serves you right, man. So you don't like him, but you kind of feel for him at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I love reading a book where the narrative takes you. You take this unlikable person and kind of form a relationship with this.
Yeah.
With this character. Those are some of the best. You've described the book as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles meets the apocalypse. Why do you draw that comparison?
Well, so basically, it's an apocalyptic road trip. So he's in Singapore. His friends are gone. He gets this chance to escape from Singapore, which the island is starting to come apart. It's under martial law. There's zombies in the streets, and he gets an opportunity from this little Chinese man to go to this Shangri-La type place. The only problem is it's 1,000 miles away, so he needs to take this girl and her little brother, and they need to travel from Singapore on the very tip of the Malaysian peninsula all the way up into China, which is actually a little bit more than 1,000 miles. So it's, I mean, they're stealing cars. They eventually get on a plane. They're on trains. So it's and there are some very funny parts in it.
That was going to be my next question. Is there a comic relief character
There's not a comic relief character. I mean, anything that's funny kind of happens to Trent, and it happens in a way that, I mean, he wouldn't think it was very funny, but it's, I mean, a few of them are kind of laugh out loud funny being done to him. So he's like the Steve Martin character, except he's in the apocalypse, right?
I love it. So the book comes out this week, and what about the name? Where's the name of the book come from? The Sealbearer. What does that refer to?
So Trent is actually carrying this tattoo, and this tattoo is linked to what's going on. So everybody's looking for this seal. And they think it's a thing. It's a coin. It's an amulet. It's whatever. It's actually him. So it's
actually him.
So it's imprinted on him. So they're all coming after him, and they all want to take him alive because they need to get this thing off of him.
I love it. I've seen some of the most unique story ideas come out of the Apocalypse Weird series, and I'm really looking forward to reading this one coming out this week, David. Before we go, you and I both are involved with another project that's coming out very soon, Tales of the Apocalypse,
yes.
Which is this anthology that that our friend Chris Porto has put so much blood, sweat, and tears into. Can you tell me just a little bit about your story that's in this collection?
Yeah, so mine's called The Waterfinder's Shadow. So basically the apocalypse has you take a pet and put it into a dystopian setting. And so some of the authors have actually written apocalyptic fiction before, and these are spin-off stories. I didn't have an apocalyptic fiction book, so I wrote a brand new story called The Waterfinder's Shadow. And it's set in a world where water has become very scarce, and basically it's separated into have and have-nots. There's a few major cities in North America that still have water supplies. They're called water holds, and basically the population stays shut up in these areas. The rest of the population is separated into clans, and they sort of wander the desert, moving from water source to water source. And the way they find the water is these guys called water finders that are essentially water dowsers. And they are able to come into the clan and sell their services to the clan to find water, and they dig a well, and as long as the water lasts, and then the clan moves on. So this particular water finder, if you lose your gift, you end up becoming a slave. So he's in his late 20s, his gift starts to falter, and he runs across a puppy, and he realizes that the puppy can smell water. So the puppy saves his skin, and they sort of form this partnership. So, like sort of like a traveling salesman, right? When these guys come into a clan to find water, they don't just show up and get out their stuff and find water and say, dig here. They have a show, right? They got shtick. And this guy's shtick is his dog. Well, actually, the dog is a real water finder in this instance. Well, when the story opens, the dog is, dogs don't live as long as people. When the story opens, the dog is essentially about to pass away. And this guy doesn't want to run out into the desert because, the dog's just going to die and he's going to have to bury him somewhere. So he's staying until the dog passes away, and then he's going to make a run for it. And as you might expect with that sort of setup, things don't exactly happen the way you would expect them to happen.
I love it. And Tales of the Apocalypse will be out in about the third week of November.
Yep.
November
20th. Yep.
Yeah. And I look forward to reading your story.
Great.
It sounds fantastic. David, thanks so much for coming back on the show. And like I said, when when the follow-up to Weapons comes out, you guys are more than welcome to come back. And I'm going to send everyone to go over and pick up the Sealbearer this week. Really looking forward to it.
Great. Appreciate it very much, Hank. Thanks.